1 Samuel chapter 17. The Philistines assembled their armies for battle and gathered at Shochoh, which belonged to Judah, setting up camp between Shochoh and Azekah in Ephesdammim. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and set up camp in the valley of Elah, arranging themselves for battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on one mountain, while Israel stood on the opposite mountain, with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, from the camp of the Philistines in Gath, came forward. He was 6 cubits and a span tall. He wore a brass helmet, and a coat of mail weighing 5,000 shekels of brass. He had brass greaves on his legs and a brass target between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. A shield-bearer walked ahead of him. Goliath stood and called out to the armies of Israel, challenging them. "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man to come down and fight me. If he defeats me, we will be your servants, but if I defeat him, you will be our servants and serve us." The Philistine taunted, "I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man to fight." Upon hearing Goliath's words, Saul and all Israel were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of Jesse from Bethlehem in Judah. He had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was considered an old man. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse followed Saul to battle. Their names were Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab, and Shammah. David was the youngest and looked after his father's sheep. The 3 oldest sons followed Saul. But David would go back and forth from Saul to tend to his father's sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, morning and evening, the Philistine champion approached and presented himself. Jesse told David, his son, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Also, take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are doing and bring back some token from them." Saul and the Israelites were in the valley of Elah, fighting the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the sheep with the keeper, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting their war cry. Israel and the Philistines had lined up for battle, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. While he was speaking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped forward and issued the same challenge. David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw Goliath, fled from him, terrified. They said, "Have you seen this man who keeps coming out? He comes to defy Israel. The king will reward the man who kills him with great wealth, and will give him his daughter in marriage and exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The men told him about the rewards, saying, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." Eliab, David's oldest brother, overheard him speaking with the men. Eliab's anger burned against David, and he asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your arrogance and wickedness of heart. You came down only to watch the battle." David replied, "What have I done now? Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. When David's words were overheard and reported to Saul, he had David brought to him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield-bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem."